Welcome back to day 2 of the Future of QMS Requirements True Quality Summit series. We are about to get an inside look at the modernization to your QMS by 2 true experts. Go ahead and get your notepads out because they will leave you with a lot of information that you can bring into your organization. This session is going to run about 35 minutes with 10 minutes for questions at the end. If any questions come up, please feel free to use that Q&A feature in the webinar and the chat to ask any questions that you may have, and we will try to get to as many as possible. The 2 panelists we have today are Ben Bancroft and Radhika Pandya. Ben is a medical device guru here at Greenlight Guru. He crazily enjoys working on audits, CAPAs, and root cause analysis. He is a quality regulatory manager. He began his career maintaining QMS for multiple companies as a CAPA and audit SME. He enjoys helping customers successfully navigate the regulations to help achieve compliance and aim towards industry best practices for their devices. Radhika is a product marketing specialist here at Greenlight Guru. She also began her career in the quality space as a quality control chemist. She then transitioned to working on product development at a medical device company. While there, she was a heavy user of Greenlight Guru. She enjoys helping develop go-to-market strategies for Greenlight Guru's new products and features, and she loves talking to customers to learn about their journey to commercialization. So welcome, everybody. I'm going to turn this over to Radhika and Ben.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Laura. So thank you for joining us, everyone. Today, we're going to be discussing how to modernize your QMS in order to keep up with the modern age of requirements. My name is Ben Bancroft, after that wonderful introduction from Laura. And this is my esteemed colleague, Radhika. So hopefully we are able to talk you through some of those things when it comes to modernization.
Yep, like Ben and Laura said, I'm Radhika, and we look forward to going through this presentation with you about modernizing your QMS. With that, we have a quick poll for you. We're asking the audience today what you currently use as a QMS and which process you find most challenging today. With that, while we give them some time to answer, let's talk a little bit about our own experiences, Ben. For me personally, when I was working in a pharma-heavy industry, we were paper-based. And then in the medical device role that I transitioned into, we were using a medical device-specific EQMS. And the difference felt like night and day. What about yourself?
I've very much experienced probably an example of all of these QMSs throughout my career. Similar to yourself, working in pharma and cosmetics, predominantly paper-based, transitioning into medical devices, definitely going down that hybrid and general EQMS perspective. And then sort of towards leading to my career at Greenlight, definitely got into that MedTech specific EQMS as well with the previous company I've worked with. So all came with their challenges, all came with their benefits as well, but certainly we're going to get the opportunity to dig into those today as well. Yeah,
absolutely.
So Radhika, what did you find the most challenging process when you were working in medical devices?
So the company I worked for was in what felt like multiple stages all at once. We had prototyping, scaling to manufacturing, and then post-market activities going on all at the same time. I'd say scaling was really hard. We were in the middle of building and starting operations at a new production site. And that was it was an amazing experience, but it was probably the most challenging. What about you, Ben?
I think from my own experiences, we always tend to get a little bit unstuck when it came to our sort of design and product development processes. We always tended to make things fairly more complicated for ourselves, which ended up resulting in making things a little bit harder than we wanted them to be. So definitely in that area of working, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. All right. Are we able to see our poll responses?
Yep. So I'm going to go ahead and end the poll. We got 114 responses, which is pretty good. So it looks like hybrid for what do you currently use as a QMS? Hybrid took 34%, followed by MedTech specific QMS, which is 24% of that vote. And then which processes do you find most challenging today? A whopping 45% of people mentioned design control and risk followed by document management at 22%.
Wow, that certainly is a telling sort of statistic on the sort of things that people are looking into.
Yep, and it looks like 20% are paper-based. Oh, that's some great data. So thanks you guys for participating in our poll. We want to start off the presentation today acknowledging that this is tough. Whether you're early on in your stages or of forming a company and raising funds, or if you're commercialized, it's tough. Achieving product lifecycle excellence isn't easy, but what makes this industry so special is the impact you have on human lives. As companies, that work you do is too important. You'll likely make mistakes along the way, but you have to start somewhere. As a company, you have all the tools to help right in front of you, but you might not know how to deal with them or where to start. Sometimes these tools are free, and often they're tools you pay for. Either way, there are dozens of them, but where should you start? What can you do to set yourself up for long-term success? That's what we will be discussing with you here today. We're here to show you today where medical device companies tend to fail and get held up, and how leveraging a modern QMS can help you overcome those challenges. So today we're going to start off by talking about the problems with present solutions like paper, spreadsheets, and single point solutions. We want to acknowledge that there is an inherent fear of change that comes with shifting the way you work and what makes that so difficult. We'll go over why there's a need for modernization in this space, what modernization looks like, and what makes for a successful QMS. This is my favorite slide. Let's be honest, paper and spreadsheets are easy. Most people know how to use Word and Excel, and the cost of having those downloaded as applications on your computer are very low. Building a paper and spreadsheet QMS is a lot like trying to bake your first Hulk-themed cake. You have a vision for what you want, so you grab all the ingredients you think you need. You pour time and effort into mixing the batter and making sure everything is perfect. You're doing the best you can with the icing on top, which we know can be really tricky. And ultimately, you're left with something that isn't what you envisioned. Sure, it's something that resembles a Hulk cake, but the reality turns out to be much different from your expectations. Not to mention, the child whose birthday party you were taking the cake to ends up being very disappointed. The same is true for paper-based QMS. The resources, cost, and potential downstream effects can end up not being what you expected them to be. The example I gave was about a harmless cake, but when it comes to real human health being impacted, it's extremely important to be critical of the tools you're using. In Greenlight Gru's 2002 industry survey, we found that 1 in 3 medical technology companies are still using paper, even though it correlates with lower performance. Let's dig into the true expectations and reality of paper. Ben, do you want to start out?
Of course. So there are many expectations when it comes to working with a paper-based quality management system. And in most cases, we're probably going to be thinking, well, it's a low starting cost. I'm not going to have to put much upfront in order to get started. However, when it comes to the reality of that, it can be expensive down the road. We may need to hire additional people in order to manage these complex systems we've established on our paper-based system, because we have to keep up with that additional manual work. We also need to consider that we can make it compliant and that it's flexible to the needs, because you can write it yourself. But the reality of that is that you can be prone to mistakes. Those processes can be clunky, and it isn't as flexible as you thought it would be.
Ben, can you explain what you mean by clunky processes? I feel like that term is used to describe so many things. What do you mean by clunky processes as it relates to paper?
Of course. So what I mean when it comes to clunky processes, it usually means that your organization's quality management system isn't interacting with itself very concurrently. You end up with one process that doesn't inherently lead to another, and your procedures don't really link up together. So essentially, you're having to work very hard just to get something moving. Also, from an expectations perspective, you may think that you don't need the resources to really manage it much because it's paper, it's simple, right? But no, unfortunately, it does tend to require lots of resources. that doesn't necessarily mean just people. It can both be time and money to sort of correct the things that have happened due to the paper.
Do you want to go into what type of activities that tend to happen with using paper that result in time being lost?
Sure. Especially, I would, in my experience from a paper-based system, especially in the audit process, I always found that a lot of time was wasted trying to locate records that were necessary to prove compliance. Looking through physical archive boxes in racking in a warehouse that would take hours, if not days, to locate. The risks of actually potentially those things going lost and having to communicate to your auditors why those things aren't there. Essentially diving into more CAPAs, which weren't necessarily required, which means more time again. So definitely there are some snowball effects resulting with some of the resources associated with paper.
What about foldering and revisioning? I imagine it was just physical folders, right? But what about revisioning? How does that work?
It's having to go around and achieve sign-offs on documentation within an organization that perhaps works over multiple sites was very challenging with paper-based systems. Even on our specific site, for a company I worked for, we had 15 units that we worked from, and they were all fairly spread apart. And one thing would have to be signed off by the production manager, and then the next thing had to be signed off by the site director. The amount of time lost walking from one building to the next could be saved from just being able to, say, log it into a system and approve it there instead.
Absolutely. Thank you.
No worries at all. But I think the last thing on this list is a lot of people do think that paper is a really quick way to get started with their quality management system. And that is certainly a very realistic thing to think. However, it's the downstream effects of that tend to come up later in the time. Not having compliant processes or a traceable EQMS because you're having to locate things that you struggle to keep and maintain.
Hey, Ben, so we have a couple of questions that have popped up here related to having a paper-based system versus EQMS, if you'd like to answer them now.
Sure, awesome. Go ahead.
So we have our first question is, what do you recommend for MedDev companies and countries where the conversion from US dollars to local currency makes GG and other EQMS systems exorbitantly expensive and out of the reach of most smaller companies in these countries?
Oh, that's a very good question. And I think it's quite prevalent for a lot of startup companies that we have out there. Sadly, with a lot of the sort of innovations that are happening in our industry and a lot of the additional requirements that we have to follow comes with additional costs, which can be a shock and much a surprise to leaders of new and upcoming companies. What I would recommend is making sure that you're really exploring the market and ensuring that you are looking for the best options available to how your organization works and is structured. Making sure that you reach out to the representatives of those companies and really coming up with a solution that is going to work for you. I know that sounds almost like a non-answer in some way, but your organization is going to be at a certain stage within its life cycle, and you need to make sure that you select something that's both meeting your budgetary needs as well as your compliance needs as well. And sometimes you do have to decide what is going to be more important for you long term. And being the quality buff that I am, I always tend to lean on that I'm more worried about things being compliant than I am about how they cost. And then I would always search for how I can be cost saving to get the things that I need.
Thanks for that answer. Our next question is, do you recommend and see startup companies investing in electronic QMSs? Funding is limited, so how can this be worth the investment for them?
I feel this does tie in quite nicely with the previous question as well. But what I would say is that if funding is limited and you're trying to decide what's the most important thing going forward, when it comes to quality, if you're starting with that quality mindset early on, it is going to save you dollars or pounds, whatever your currency is, down the long term. So it may seem like a lot of money right now, but it's going to save you a lot of pain and concern later on in the future. So definitely consider that if you can afford it, that you go for it, because that one-off cost or recurring monthly cost may be something that you can maintain long term.
Thank you. Another one is, I would like to ask you how to leave the papers. Although it's only partial part, when certification bodies and or notified bodies still require signed papers, how do you move away from a paper-based system when there's those requirements in place?
So just so that I'm understanding correctly, when we have our notified bodies require us to still sign documentation, POs, that kind of thing, how do we ourselves move away from that mindset? I think it's about us taking the opportunity to educate our notified bodies as much as they take the time to review and audit us, showing them that we have processes in place that they can interact with quite cleanly and quite carefully. For example, we have systems in order to be able to bring in external users to our electronic quality management systems. And should your notified body be amicable to it, you can bring them in and they can actually conduct those approvals electronically to keep that Part 11 compliance and move away from paper-based systems.
We do have a few more questions. I wanted to leave it up to our panelists here to determine if we want to go ahead and answer those questions or if we need to move forward and get to those questions.
If we move forward for now, and then if we have some more time within, we can jump into some more questions, no problem. Radhika, are you of the same mind?
Yes, that sounds good. We love the questions though, so we'll definitely have time at the end to answer more of them. Ben, I think.
Awesome. So one of the things that we like to show is how the transition from paper-based can sometimes feel when you're potentially using single source systems as opposed to something that interacts with itself. And sadly, both paper and those hybrid systems in a way tend to end up causing you to work in a labyrinth of different processes that becomes confusing, difficult, and just overly laborsome. What we try to encourage is that by going for something more specific, going for that more directed approach with a MedTech specific EQMS results in being able to tie these processes together and save time and effort in the long run.
Something else we find is that oftentimes people will start out with paper and quickly realize, oh man, we don't like this anymore. And instead of trying to leverage a modern EQMS, the next, what seemingly easiest thing to do is to adopt several disjointed single point solutions. And the labyrinth is still there when you have connecting people, processes, and data. You can't do that when you have multiple tools all trying to do the same thing. So, Ben, I agree with you completely there.
It certainly means that it moves into that situation of fear of change. What do we do? How do we get ourselves out of this situation? Do we just live with what we have because the fear of change is preventing us from moving forward? And within my experience in the industry, I've certainly experienced almost every element in the spectrum from paper-based to MedTech specific EQMSs. But I want to sort of start and sort of reminisce on what it was like to work in a paper-based system, specifically the risks involved with regards to how you maintain your records within your organization. I remember a time as I mentioned previously already, that having your documents in archive boxes, in racking, in warehouses, is a very common theme for a lot of companies who have to work in this way. However, the risk of destruction of those records is also something we have to be conscious of. My example being that we had a roof leak within one of our warehouses, which resulted in a significant amount of our validation material being destroyed. And we've been working off an e-system, the likelihood of that happening is almost reduced to nothing. So it's definitely, when it comes to paper, you have to think of the abstract things that could happen to those physical records as well.
I have a good example of destruction as well. Similar but different, where I was working in the lab and someone beside me spilled solvent all over a stack of papers that had ink, and the solvent destroyed those papers. They had to be regenerated, testing had to be redone. It was a whole mess. So, yep, I think the possibilities of what could happen are endless there.
as an ex-lab tech myself, Radhika, I can certainly feel your pain when it comes to solvent management in the lab. And one of those things when it comes to good documentation practices and GMP, for example, we all know that we're not allowed to recreate any data necessarily. We always have to keep our original records. And if that record is damaged or destroyed, how do we talk that through with our auditors? And certainly that's one of the risks that comes with being paper-based.
What about general versus a medical device specific QMS, Ben? What are the pros to having a medical device specific QMS rather than a general one?
So my experience from working in both, the benefits of going into that general EQMS is that you don't usually have to change your processes too much. You can adapt the system to your needs. However, it doesn't take into consideration that what you're doing may not necessarily be the correct or the best practice way of doing things. And that's essentially where a MedTech specific EQMS comes into play. The workflows and the processes are built to support how the medical device industry operates, so that yes, you may have to adjust the way you do things right now, but you have the peace of mind knowing that you're going into that process meeting the compliance requirements already, or at least to a point.
Absolutely. That kind of takes us into our need for modernization. Without a modern solution, MedTech companies lack critical insights they need into their own documentation and processes. With paper and disjointed tools, visibility and traceability are lost. How can you identify gaps and downstream impacts without a connected system? Another piece to the puzzle is lack of capabilities. Continuous improvement is challenging. Managing the product lifecycle while navigating regulatory requirements is not easy. So that's why we encourage people, work smarter, not harder. Medical device companies should leverage an EQMS that's designed for your industry, one that does connect people, processes, and data. This way you can scale efficiently no matter what stage you're in. And Ben told me such a fun fact about what SMART means in this acronym, what the acronym SMART means in this saying. So Ben, do you want to share that with the audience?
Sure. I've spent most of my career kind of saying this to many of my colleagues, saying that you must work smart, not hard. And it really came from sort of someone I worked quite closely with in my career. And he always mentioned to me that SMART was an acronym, and broken down cleanly, it was that you need to be specific, measurable, attainable, relevant, and time-based. Anything that you do within your EQMS or quality management system as a whole needs to consider these 5 tenets, if you want to call them that.
Thanks, Ben. I am obsessed with that. And I just learned it today. So I will be sharing that with everyone that I know. So what makes a QMS modern? We have a recipe for a modern EQMS. So let's start out with the obvious. A modern QMS is digital. It's a cloud-based ecosystem. It has evolved beyond paper and single point solutions to match the ever-changing digital world we live in today. Being a digital ecosystem comes with other perks too, though. It accommodates hybrid or remote work for employees. It allows for geographically diverse workflows, flexibility, and cross-team collaboration. Ultimately, this results in increased productivity and improved quality processes. Better quality processes means improved quality for your devices. Ben, what else makes it EQMS modern?
Well, with the ever-changing regulations, specifically when it comes to things like 13485, we're expected to have our software validated. So being able to purchase and utilize a software that is already validated up front, you have the peace of mind that you don't have to write your own protocols, that you're able to lean on the expertise of the organization that has already created that validation. You also are going to have a situation where things are now automated and a little bit more less time consuming than you're used to. No more are the days of you having to walk between buildings to get signatures. Those workflows are built in for you to consider the compliance and those Part 11 reasonings that you need.
Yep, and that built-in compliance means your QMS is aligned with regulations that impact the industry. So 13485, 14971. I'm sorry, y'all, there's a train going by my house right now. I hope you can't hear that. And Part 11 compliance signatures built directly into your solution.
Exactly.
Ben, do you want to take this one about what makes an EQMS powerful?
Of course. So we say, how can an EQMS be powerful? And there are certainly lots of different things that could mean. But for us, we certainly think that having the ability to have onboarding and training programs available to clients so that they are able to understand the platform at a granular level so that they can dig apart what they need the system to do for them is really supportive and important. Having traceability and connectivity, something that we all attain to have when we work in the quality industry and the regulatory world as well, making sure we have that identification available to us at a mouse click away. Templates, being able to have things available to us that we're able to use within our EQMS. We don't necessarily have to start from scratch.
What kind of templates are out there, Ben? What are some? Yeah.
Go ahead.
No.
So when it comes to templates, things such as, it could be something as simple as a gap analysis tool that you find online that has been provided by an organization. It could be documentation templates in order to justify and set up the foundation of your quality management system. It could be things that just get you going rather than you having to start from scratch, essentially. You want it to be efficient. This is what makes most of our QMS solutions powerful, is that you're able to come in without having to work harder, as we say. You get to utilize that smart approach. You want it to be user-friendly. People who don't necessarily work in your quality environment, you want them to be able to leverage it in the same way as you do. And that also ties into it being easy to use and accessible. But also having a support team, having people on the other side of the fence available to you at another mouse click, so that if you do run into problems, you're able to leverage them and they can get you up and running again, even if you have a problem.
Absolutely. So what makes a QMS successful? A successful QMS is one that is not only industry specific to you, but goes above and beyond by providing teams with, like Ben said, industry expertise that is dedicated and a community for professionals to use to talk about their experiences and learn more at the same time. This includes invaluable things like deep dive coursework that aligns with regulations, access to medical device industry experts who've been in your shoes. Like Ben touched on before, a successful QMS is a single source of truth for your people, data, and processes to come together and be connected. Our industry survey also found that 87% of market leaders in MedTech are using medical device specific solutions to manage their QMS. So if today's talk resonates with you and you're looking to modernize your QMS to live in a more digital world where things are seamless, easy, and compliant, let us know. This week, we're celebrating the milestone of helping over 1,000 customers modernize their QMS. If you're interested in learning more about Greenlight Guru, let me or Ben know, or visit the link in the chat to talk to someone on our team even quicker.
I suppose that leads us quite nicely, Radhika, to dive into our remaining Q&A, and I will definitely encourage anyone who is on the call now to put forth their questions while we still have some time left with today's webinar. You're on mute, by the way, Laura. Sorry.
The perennial struggle of Zoom. All right, so we can dive into some questions now. And we have a couple of really good ones. So we'll start with this one. Are there any downfalls of an EQMS compared to paper? Software, cybersecurity issues, and failure risks, etc.
I think that's something that's always going to be on people's minds when they transition from paper to something digital, be it MedTech specific or general EQMS as a whole. Cybersecurity is definitely something that's on the forefront of auditing organizations and competent authorities like the FDA and MHRA. And certainly when it comes to building out those solutions for customers, cybersecurity is something we all have to take quite to heart. So yes, in essence, there is that risk, as there is with any digital software. However, when it comes to the validation that's conducted, if we're being specific to Greenlight in some senses, that is already taken into consideration when it comes to the protocols that we write and the support we provide our customers as well.
Awesome. So next question, against EQMS packages, can we make use of Google Drive or Microsoft SharePoint?
Well, that is a very, probably a very decisive question, I would say. The honest question is that there is nothing stopping you. So if you are using SharePoint, if you are using Google Drive to store documentation, that is something that you as an organization have made the decision to do. But in essence, you are just digitalizing the paper-based system that you're using, and it's no different from being able to locate them in that sense. Yes, it removes the time-consuming elements of having to locate things manually. However, it is from a identification and traceability perspective considered to be just as high risk as a paper-based system. In essence, you are there is no strong security behind those files. You can share them with anyone. And also there's a risk of things being deleted quite easily within systems like Google Drive and SharePoint because they don't have the obsolescence processes built into EQMS systems.
Right, I've got two questions that I'm going to kind of combine into one because they kind of fit in well with each other. So the first one is, in terms of EQMS validation, where software is already validated by the provider, like with Greenlight Guru, is there an expectation that a MedTech company is required to do their own PQ testing along with that? And then kind of a follow-up to that question, how are EQMS solutions set up to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11 with validation documentation provided? Sure.
Okay. So when it comes to validation as a whole, you as an organization have to define what software validation looks like. That is clear from the 13485 requirements and the needs when it comes to Part 11 compliance as well for electronic signatures. There's nothing stating there that you are required to conduct that validation yourself, just that you have a process in place to maintain and control that validation. So in the situation where you may be working with a software provider who does give you pre-validated software, you'll be required to make sure that the uniqueness of that arrangement is documented within your procedures. So for example, in the situation with Greenlight, we would always recommend that you update your software validation procedures to include a section on how Greenlight Guru validation is handled, separate to any other software validation you may conduct within your organization. And then remind me of the second part there, Laura, so I don't forget.
It was related to how EQMS solutions are set up to be compliant with 21 CFR Part 11.
Sure. So what we do, or what can be done, should I say, is that when the protocols are written from an OQ/PQ perspective, the Part 11 compliance is built into the test scripts that we run. So to ensure that that Part 11 compliance is maintained, and we will also have those protocols audited by objective people within the organization to confirm that the tests that have been completed do meet the requirements appropriately.
Right. Next question, which I think is an interesting question, which I can add to if you need. But can you throw away your paper records once everything is in your EQMS?
With some, yes. With others, no. So there is some requirements from both an EU perspective and an US perspective where certain records must be maintained for the lifetime of the device plus a certain amount of years. And I can never remember the specific number, but always consider that for as long as your device is on the market, there are certain records that must be maintained, regardless if you started in paper or not. And that's also something that has to be considered when you move into an EQMS as well, is that how far long do I have to maintain these records for? And that should be written in your record control procedures when it comes to record retention. Laura, I'm happy for you to add to that if you have something to add as well.
Sure. And also depends if you're a combo product or combo device or have pharmaceuticals, you have to keep original records from test procedure or test results that you get, any printouts from computers, or you're doing a titration sheet that you're filling out. On the medical device side, it's a little bit different. Once you start adding that record into an EQMS, that EQMS record can be considered the original source. So You need to just look at your device and what you need to comply to. Pharmaceuticals, you have to keep that original source. EQMS for medical devices, that can count as your original source.
Awesome. Thanks for that, Laura.
Okay. Let me see what would be a good next question. Okay. So this one is, I would like to know your recommendation on best practice for document version control. For signature, do you need to have a validated e-signature tool for an EQMS system?
So if you are looking to leverage the modern approach, which is to utilize an EQMS or some form of electronic signature management, you do need to ensure that you have that meet the Part 11 compliance requirements, and certainly do dig into the guidance documents that the FDA provide on that topic. So when it comes to softwares like DocuSign, for example, which is a very popular solution out there when it comes to signing documents electronically, that doesn't currently meet those requirements of Part 11 compliance. So as an organization, when it comes to your software validation, you would be required to fill the gaps somehow by applying sort of some rigor or some controls in place to meet that level of requirement. Hopefully that does answer the question.
Perfect. I have another question. How does GG adapt to SAMHSA devices?
So especially with this new age of software as a medical device, we're seeing many requirements be adapted to meet those needs, as well as some of the guidance that's provided both from EU and US in terms of how we approach medical devices that are built in terms of software. The benefits of Greenlight specifically is that we do have integrations with software such as Jira, which is very much used significantly within the medical device for software space. And we also have industry experts on our side of the pond that are able to guide new organizations who are developing software as a medical device in best practices when it comes to EQMS management as well. So whereas Greenlight is targeted towards medical device as a whole, there are elements that are suited to and considered for that SAMHSA industry as well.
So we have another comment here. DocuSign has two versions. I believe one is Part 11 compliant. They want a confirmation on that, if we knew.
I currently wasn't aware that they had another version there was, so I'm certainly going to be coming away from this to have a look myself to confirm that too. Always love to figure out what's going on in the world when it comes to medical devices.
So we have another question. It's around 1345 and limb systems and how those go together.
As in the use of a limb system with 13485?
Yes, I believe so.
Sure. So my experience with working in limb systems when I was working in pharma and cosmetics, and it was where we used to input a lot of our test data from the laboratories, such as micro and chemistry data. And one of the things you have to consider from a 13485 perspective is ensuring that it's software validated. I feel like I am a broken record when I say that, but it is something that a lot of companies and organizations either forget about or believe that the software is validated up front. And LIMS, being very customizable to the company's needs to have rigid protocols in place to meet those 13485 requirements. From an actual data management perspective, you'll want to be making sure that you meet your requirements for record retention. So are you printing off certificates of analysis from that system and archiving them in a certain way? Are you generating CFCs for shipments for devices? You need to make sure that level of traceability and identification is maintained from a 13485 perspective as well.
We got another question. When you said your EQMS was certified to 21 CFR, do you mean that it was certified by a third party?
So Part 11 compliance, as well as 21 CFR 820 are regulations that aren't certified. So these are things that are enforced as a federal regulation by the US government. And this is something that we can be audited to but not certified to, sadly. So when companies claim that they have Part 11 compliance, it means that they have considered all of the FDA guidance and regulations associated with it, and then built the system around those requirements. The intent would be is that when they discuss things with the FDA, they are then able to check and confirm whether or not you meet those regulations or not, but it isn't something you can be certified to.
All right, next question. Any difference between MedTech QMS versus pharmaceutical QMS?
Yes.
Radhika.
Radhika's probably got experience here too.
So there is a lot of differences. I would say from my experience, the industries are regulated by slightly different regulations too. So in my experience, the pharmaceutical company I worked at, we were frequently audited by the DEA, which you don't see as often with medical device. I would say the workflows are pretty different too. The type of testing requirements, all that to say, there are still some differences. Similarities and differences between the two, but it would really just depend on your device and your pharmaceutical component. So I personally haven't worked at one that has a combination device like that. So I don't know, maybe Ben or Laura have some additional insights there.
I certainly worked in a company where our device was considered pharmaceuticals in certain jurisdictions and medical devices in others. So we had to run essentially a hybrid quality management system to address that. You'll obviously hear terms like the Orange Guide when it comes to pharmaceuticals for good manufacturing practices, but we're very much entering an age where medical devices are being held to the same scrutiny that pharmaceuticals are, so that the QMSs and the regulations that we follow are almost akin to our pharmaceutical forefathers, if you want to call it that. So that's certainly my experience, is that those GMP requirements that we follow have been inherited from pharma, so that actually you are following almost identical requirements in that sense.
Yeah, and I think that's my experience as well. I only spent a year in pharma, and my rest of my decade has been in medical device. But, you know, like I mentioned before, there's a little bit more stringent record keeping as far as original copies of test records when it comes to pharmaceuticals, as well as, you know, you have a lot more opportunities of issues where you damage records or batch records while you're manufacturing things in a, you know, chemical manufacturing environment. A lot of situations where, at least in my experience, our document package was issued to us with a stamp issued number. And if you had to recreate that record, or not, maybe not redo, but, you know, you have to give a readable version of that record, you have to be reissued documentation. And from my experience on the medical device side, it's not as, you know, tight on the control of those documents.
I would say, just as sort of a final throwaway comment, that whenever it comes to setting up your quality management system from a best practice perspective, there's a lot we can learn from the pharma industry in terms of the things that they bring to the table, and certainly medical devices taking that journey in that direction as well, especially since the sort of the transition from 9001 and 13485 becoming very different standards in their own right, rather than the additional requirements that 13485 imposed on top of 9001.
So another question, which falls into my category as an onboarding and implementation guru, but does Greenlight Guru have set training courses if a company is transitioning their QMS to Greenlight Guru, specifically training for employees new to quality assurance and helping set up that process in QMS?
So me and Laura have the benefit of working on onboarding and implementation here at Greenlight Guru, and it's very much our job to get you through that. So essentially, if you were to purchase Greenlight Guru, you would be partnered up with a guru from the Medical Device Guru team, and they would lead you through not just how the platform works, but getting you set up in terms of understanding those quality assurance and regulatory affairs requirements, so that you can start on a strong foundation and get your QMS up and running. Laura, is there anything you wanted to add to that at all?
No, you covered it pretty well. But yeah, we have a really great team here that will, you know, we have great courses on the why, which you were talking about, you know, helping people understand why we're doing this, why EQMS is so important, the how and Greenlight Guru of how do you make that happen. And then we have practice examples, and then we have a team of our onboarding gurus, as well as a strategic team that can help you implement that QMS and be successful.
Awesome.
I think we're running up on time here.
Yeah.
I know we have a few more questions in the chat about Greenlight Guru. I'm pretty sure Laura has put a link in the chat for where you can go to talk to someone on our team about any of the questions we had to leave unanswered.
Yeah.
But yeah, thank you all for joining us here today.
Yep. So like Radhika said, we're at time. Thank you, Radhika and Ben. That was a really great session. I've included in the chat, there's a link to our 2023 State of the MedTech Industry Survey that we have out right now. Please take that survey. You could have a chance to win $100 as well as donate $100 to Project Cure. So check out that link. And we hope to see you back here tomorrow for our next session on QMS from a regulatory perspective.